The old pickup truck rumbled to life as Jake turned the key in the ignition. He glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It read 11:43 p.m. Another late-night delivery, he thought to himself. But tonight felt different. An eerie tension hung in the air, thick and palpable. Ignoring the unease gnawing at him, Jake pulled out of the deserted gas station and onto the dark, winding road. The moon cast an ethereal glow over the landscape, illuminating the dense forest on either side of the narrow highway. Jake's knuckles tightened around the steering wheel as he navigated the deserted road. It was a shortcut, one he had never taken before, but time was of the essence. As he drove deeper into the night, the forest seemed to close in around him, swallowing the road in darkness. Shadows danced at the edges of his vision, playing tricks on his mind. He shook his head, trying to dispel the creeping sense of dread that threatened to overwhelm him. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the middle of the road, illuminated by the truck's headlights. Jake slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching in protest as the truck skidded to a halt. His heart pounded in his chest as he peered through the windshield, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Standing in the middle of the road was a woman, her long black hair swirling around her like a cloak. Her eyes gleamed in the darkness, reflecting the light from the truck's headlights. Jake's breath caught in his throat as he watched her slowly approach the vehicle. "Please help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the engine. Jake hesitated, his mind racing. Instinct told him to drive away, to leave the strange woman behind in the darkness. But something about her haunted gaze stirred a sense of compassion within him. Against his better judgment, he reached for the door handle and stepped out of the truck. "What happened?" Jake asked, his voice trembling slightly. The woman's lips parted in a ghost of a smile. "My car broke down," she said, her voice honeyed and smooth. "I've been walking for miles. Please, can you give me a ride?" Jake glanced back at the truck, uncertainty gnawing at him. But the woman's eyes held him captive, drawing him in like a moth to a flame. With a resigned sigh, he nodded and gestured for her to climb into the passenger seat. As the woman settled into the truck, Jake couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over him. He cast a wary glance at her as he pulled back onto the road, the engine roaring to life once more. But the woman seemed unfazed, her eyes fixed on the darkness outside. They drove in silence for several minutes, the only sound the steady hum of the engine. Jake's grip on the steering wheel tightened as they passed deeper into the forest, the shadows growing thicker around them. He stole a glance at the woman out of the corner of his eye, but she remained impassive, lost in thought. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed through the night, causing Jake to jump in his seat. He slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a halt on the deserted road. Heart pounding, Jake peered through the windshield, trying to make sense of what had just happened. In the darkness ahead, something lay sprawled across the road, its shape barely discernible in the dim light. Jake's breath caught in his throat as he realized what it was: a deer, its lifeless eyes staring blankly into the night. "Stay here," Jake muttered to the woman, his voice barely above a whisper. But when he turned to look at her, she was gone. Panic surged through him as he scanned the empty passenger seat, searching frantically for any sign of her presence. But there was nothing, just the cold, empty silence of the night. Heart pounding, Jake climbed out of the truck and approached the motionless figure in the road. His breath caught in his throat as he knelt beside it, the stench of blood thick in the air. The deer's body was mangled, its bones shattered by the impact of the truck. As Jake reached out to touch the lifeless creature, a sudden movement caught his eye. He looked up to see the woman standing at the edge of the road, her eyes fixed on him with a look of hunger in their depths. Without a word, she turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving Jake alone with the dead deer. Shaken, Jake climbed back into the truck and continued on his journey, the events of the night swirling through his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had narrowly escaped a brush with something dark and sinister, something that lurked just beyond the edge of the road. And as he drove deeper into the night, the forest seemed to close in around him, swallowing him whole in its cold, empty embrace. But no matter how fast he drove, he couldn't escape the feeling that something was following him, something hungry and relentless, just waiting for the perfect moment to strike.